In this little mini tutorial, I'm going to be discussing the difference between value, saturation, and temperature. And I get a lot of questions about this, about why is this important? Well, it's important because you need to think of this as kind of like a roadmap. It's knowing how to get there is going to save a lot of bad detours. And one of the problems I see with beginners when they finish a painting and they're just unhappy with it, and you can tell that something's just not right, that's because it usually comes down to value. Understanding that your painting needs some dark areas and it needs some light areas. A little bit of that problem also comes from saturation. You need bright areas of your painting and you need dull areas of your painting. And then the third part of that recipe would be that you also need warm colors and you need cool colors. So I'm going to go over and explain what the difference is between all three of these characteristics. So what I've done is I'm going to be showing you these examples with nickel azo yellow. That is PY 150, so that's pigment yellow 150. Quinacridone magenta, that is PR 122, pigment red 122. And I'm also going to use ultramarine blue, and that is pigment blue 29. And those numbers just help you when you're trying to choose between brands. You want to make sure that they are single pigment colors, and that's why I've given you the numbers and the actual chemical name of those colors. Okay, so let's set that aside and let's talk about what value is. Basically, value is the lightness or the darkness of a color. So right out of the tube, full strength, I have taken these three colors and I've made some circles going across so that I can see how light that color can get and how dark that color can get. So I've got my yellow, and you can see that I've added a little bit of water each time to lighten it up, and that's about as light as that yellow is going to get. And with the red, the magenta, I've done the same thing. I just kept adding water and more water, and I could actually make that value even a little bit lighter. But for the purposes of this tutorial, it's just enough to show you that this is what value means, the lightness and darkness of a color. Same with the blue. So I've got right full strength out of the tube, and then I've added just a little bit of water each time to lighten it up. So that's really important in a painting. You want to have plenty of dark areas and you want to have plenty of light areas just to give that painting some life. And you also don't want it to be, flat. And you're going to get flat in your painting if all of your values are centered around one of these areas. Okay, so that's basically value. There's a lot more to it than that, but when you're starting out and you're learning, you want to keep this in mind, and you might want to take the template that I've provided and take the colors that you're going to be painting with and just play with them like this. See how many values you can get out of them. See what kind of saturation you can get, and I'll explain that in a minute. And check out and see how well you can change the temperature of that color, and we'll go over that in a minute too. Okay, so basically value, the lightness and the darkness of colors. Now let's go to saturation. Saturation is the brightness or dullness of a color. So let me say that again. Saturation is the brightness or dullness of a color. Value is the lightness or darkness of a color. So you want to learn the difference between these two. Once you learn that, your paintings will really, really improve. So let's start with the yellow. You can see that, again, that's right out of the tube with just a little bit of water. And you can see how nice and bright that is. What I did to dull down the saturation is I added a little bit of its opposite color on the color wheel. So here I have my nice bright nickel azo yellow, and all I did was just little bit by little bit, I mixed quinacridone magenta and ultramarine blue to get my purple, or violet if you want to call it that, and I just added a touch, just a little tiny bit. And if you look at the saturation, you can tell that I've kept the value the same. I have not watered down these colors. I kept the same value right out of the tube, the same brightness, and all I did was just add a touch of that purple. So you can see that it just dulled it down slightly. Then I added even more of that purple, and you can see now that I've got a really dull yellow, and here's my really bright yellow, yet everything is the same value. So that may seem a little bit confusing at first, but trust me, if you practice this, one of these moments you're going to go, aha, I get it. I understand what the difference between value and saturation is. So that may seem a little bit confusing for now, but keep practicing this and you'll start really understanding that. Okay, so let's look at the saturation on this quinacridone magenta. So right out of the tube, and it's about this value right here. I didn't make it really dark right out of the tube because I want you to really be able to see what happened when I added the opposite color, which is for the quinacridone magenta, it's green. So I mixed a little bit of my nickel azo yellow and a little bit of my ultramarine blue, and I got a nice green, and then I just added a touch, just a tiny bit, kept the value the same, and I dulled that very bright quinacridone magenta right out of the tube. I dulled it down just a tiny bit. Then again, I added a little bit more of my green, and I got a beautiful dull magenta. So that's saturation. So let's also look on the ultramarine blue. Same thing. My value is about matching close to that one. So it's very bright. It's that single pigment. Nothing is added to it. And I did the same thing for that blue. I went across and I mixed my nickel azo yellow with my quinacridone magenta. I made a little bit of an orange and very, very light amount, dropped some in, and I just dulled that very bright ultramarine down just a little tiny bit. Then I added a little bit more and I really dulled it down. So saturation, the brightness or dullness of a color, value, the darkness or lightness of a color. So now let's go over temperature. So what exactly does that mean when people talk about the temperature of a color? Well, in general, colors that are on this side of the color wheel, where the blue is, tend to be cooler. They just have a nice ocean type of a feel, a nice cool forest. Colors on this side of the color wheel tend to be fiery and warm. You'd think more of like a desert, you think warmth, heat. So in saying that, how in the world would you define a blue? Well, in reality, theoretically, blue is the cool color. But there are also warm and cool versions of that color. For instance, ultramarine blue, and this also takes time. It takes time to really observe colors and see where you think, where your eye sees that color going. Ultramarine blue tends to lean more towards the warm side. You can almost feel like there's a little bit of red in an ultramarine blue. So that's why we call ultramarine blue warm. Now I've got, and I've just added this in here for reference. We're not using this color. This isn't part of my color wheel, but I just want you to see what happens when you throw in another type of blue. This is a very, very cool blue because you can see that it's almost got a little bit of green in it. So we call phthalo blue, which this is, we call that a cool blue. You almost can see ocean type of colors in there. So that's the difference between a warm and a cool color. Same thing with this red. I have my quinacridone magenta, and it tends to head this direction. So it tends to be a little bit cool. You can almost feel like there's just a touch of blue in that magenta. So we have our cool red. Our warm red, you look at that and that looks very fiery and very warm, very deserty. And that's because it has a little bit of yellow in it. So it leans this way towards the color wheel. So I've got my warm red and my cool red. Now let's talk about the nickel azo yellow. It's a little bit harder when you're looking at a yellow because yellow is kind of like the blue. You think, well, it should be warm. It makes me think of the sun, of summertime. But yellows are the same way. They can lean either warm or cool. This is my nickel azo yellow, and it's definitely sunny, and so you can see it kind of leaning towards this side of the color wheel. This yellow is Hansa yellow, and it looks almost like it has a little bit of a touch of green in it, so it leans more towards this side of the color wheel. So that gives you an example of warm and cool colors, saturated colors and dull colors, and value, darks and lights. So if you're new and you're really not familiar with understanding how these colors are going to play into your painting, I really suggest downloading my little template and just playing around with that and see what you get. And then, as always, before I start a painting, I go over with you the 3 colors that we're going to be using and how we're going to get all those secondary colors and all the different values and saturations and warm or cool that we're going to get in our painting. So keep that in mind when you go to make your color wheel recipe cards, when you're starting some of my paintings, and really try to add in some value, saturation, and temperature scales. And I promise you it will really help make a difference in your painting. All right, thank you so much for watching this tutorial.